The Jets are playing the Miami Dolphins the day after Thanksgiving. The rest of the schedule will be known tonight. Today we're talking things to watch as the 2023 Jets schedule is unveiled ahead on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, this is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Thursday, May 11th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to this show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so that you'll get new episodes as soon as they are posted. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help the podcast out and help other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. The NFL schedule comes out tonight. Today we're talking about things you should watch for as we find out the dates and times of New York Jets 2023 games. NFL Network will be having a 3-hour special as the schedule is unveiled because apparently it takes NFL Network 3 hours to tell us what the schedule is. This is the second straight year they're doing it. I made fun of it last year. It deserves to be made fun of even more this year because they had a full year to see the 3-hour special and realize it was a ridiculous idea, and for whatever reason, they've decided to bring it back. To me, this is the most overhyped day on the NFL calendar. We already know all of the opponents the Jets have this year. I think this day would be much more exciting if we did not already know the 17 games the Jets were playing. All we learned tonight are the dates and times of these games. So it's not like we're finding out the Jets are playing Kansas City. We already know the Jets are playing Kansas City. We're just finding out when and where when the games will be played, the dates and times. But we're in a quiet season we're quiet part of the NFL calendar, so there's not much going on. The NFL feels a need to figure out a way to stay in the news, so we get a 3-hour special on NFL Network. That's not to say today is meaningless. We do find out who the Jets will play week 1. We find out who the Jets will play every week through week 18, and there are some things to be taken from this. It's just overhyped. Overhyped does not mean meaningless, it just means it's overhyped, and we don't need a 3-hour special. I can take you through some things to watch in about 20-25 minutes, and that's what we'll do today. Now, we actually found out one of the games the Jets will be playing this year because the NFL announced a couple of games early. The Jets will not be going to Europe, and they actually may have a small advantage from not going to Europe because the other 3 teams in the AFC East all have to go out to Europe. So the Jets are the only team that doesn't have to go abroad across the Atlantic Ocean this year. Perhaps that will be a small advantage. And you may remember last year, the Jets actually played the Green Bay Packers after their trip to London. And after you go over the Atlantic, either to London or to Germany, which are the venues where these international games are played, the NFL allows you to choose what you want to do the next week. So most teams take the bye. Last year, the Green Bay Packers actually said, we don't need the bye. We're going to play the Jets. And the Jets sure showed them because the Jets went out to Lambeau Field the next week and blew the Packers out. So the Jets do not play an international game. However, they will be playing on Black Friday. They will be hosting the Miami Dolphins. The game will be 3 o'clock. It will be an Amazon Prime game. Amazon Prime, of course, hosts Thursday Night Football. They show you Thursday night games through the year, but Thanksgiving's a little bit different. The Thanksgiving night game, even though it's technically a Thursday night game, is on NBC, so Amazon's not doing a game that Thursday night. Instead, they will do a game Friday afternoon as the Jets face the Miami Dolphins again, 3 o'clock Eastern time at MetLife Stadium, so get your shopping done early. The NFL is referring to it as a historic game because it's the first time the NFL will ever play a regular season game on Black Friday, or so they say. I like to think the word historic should be saved for something that's actually interesting. So to me, this is not historic, but it is noteworthy. The Jets get a division rival in their building the day after Thanksgiving. So we'll look for the rest of the schedule tonight. It could leak through the day. And that's one of the most absurd parts of this 3-hour specials. There are definitely going to be teams whose schedules will be known by the time this special hits the air, because this is one of the days where news leaks out to reporters. And we may know who the Jets are playing. We may know the whole Jets schedule by the time 8 o'clock rolls around. So it'll be 8 o'clock at the latest. We'll find out other things through the day. And we already know the Jets are playing the Miami Dolphins on Black Friday because the NFL has announced some of the games early, because 3 hours is not enough. Apparently this has to be over the course of 2 days. The NFL has to tell us where and when these games are. So lots of exciting stuff, as you can tell. What are some of the things we should be watching for? Well, I'm always interested with the Jets in a couple of things. And I think it's especially interesting this year because Aaron Rodgers is now in the mix. And the Jets have played a lot of 1 o'clock Sunday games through the recent years because they really have not been a very good football team. And bad teams tend to get put at the 1 o'clock slot because those are the time slots where the least number of viewers are watching. The bigger games happen, they're either at the 4:25 window on Sunday, they're Sunday night, sometimes they're Monday night. The Jets are probably going to have more primetime games this year because they have Aaron Rodgers, because they're a topic of interest across the league. And I think there's one very specific thing that you should be looking for. How many road games do you have after the Jets play on Monday Night Football? Because that's actually a pretty big disadvantage. It's tough to play that week after Monday night because you have one less day to prepare. And your opponent presumably did not play you on Monday night. You usually don't, even a division rival, you don't play them back-to-back weeks. If the Jets play Buffalo on a Monday night, they're not going to play Buffalo the next Sunday. They're going to play a team that did not play Monday night. So the Jets will be, when you play Monday Night Football, you're at a disadvantage. But it's especially true when you're on the road because, going on the road adds extra things that you need to worry about through the week. So that's one thing that I look for right off the bat is how many short weeks do you have? It's a little different when you play on Thursday or Friday because at least then your opponent also is dealing with a short week. And then the Jets' case for this Friday game, the Dolphins are the team that has to travel. So the Dolphins are probably going to have to come out on Thanksgiving. The Dolphins won't get a Thanksgiving. Well, the Jets will. So a little bit of an advantage there. I think the other thing to watch is, I don't know whether this counts for the Jets Thursday night game in this season. I kind of hope it does because I prefer playing on Friday rather than Thursday. You at least get your players an extra day to prepare for the game. Thursday night games are tough. There is now a new rule in the NFL that teams can play a second Thursday night game through the year. I hope the Jets avoid that. And maybe they will because with Aaron Rodgers, there'll be a team that gets more focus on Sunday night and Monday night. So maybe they'll avoid that fate of getting the second Thursday night game through the year. But we know that Amazon paid a lot of money for the Thursday night package, and we know they did not get very good bang for their buck last year. And I think the NFL is very cognizant of the amount of money Amazon's paying. So they want to put more interesting matchups on Thursday night. Will the Jets be put there more than once? Hopefully the Jets can avoid Thursday night at all. I'm kind of hoping this Friday game counts as their annual visit to Thursday night football. I don't know whether it will, but you like to avoid the short weeks. Thursday, Friday is a little bit different because, again, at least your opponent's also on a short week, but it could lead to more injuries. I mean, the players don't like playing on Thursday night football because they feel like your body doesn't get enough time to rest up from the beating you took on Sunday. So that's another thing to watch. So these are just kind of player maintenance things. Another thing I always look for is when the bye week comes. And I'm always of the mindset that it's better to have a late bye week than an early bye week. Now, I shouldn't say always, because sometimes a team benefits from an early bye week. Sometimes the team gets really banged up early in the season. Sometimes they suffer injuries to key players the first couple of weeks, the first 2-3 weeks, and an early bye week comes at the right time. But I think generally speaking, you want your players rested up for the home stretch. You want players to have some time to heal for those bumps and bruises. A later bye week in November, to me, that's generally a better thing. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue our talk about what to watch for on tonight's schedule release. There are some pretty big games on the schedule for the Jets this season. I have some thoughts about when they should hope these games fall, and I'll tell you what they are as we continue this Thursday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Built Bar. If you're going to make it through a 3-hour schedule release special on NFL Network tonight, you might want to have some Built Bars with you to help yourself through it. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market. Absolutely amazing. These bars are delicious. They cover 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in amazing flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. And these bars may taste like a candy bar, but they maintain amazing macros. And what's better is that they're healthy. Most bars only have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 17 grams of protein. Here's the best part. You don't need to wait to get a box. For years, you've been hearing me talk about ordering your Built bars at Built.com, and of course, you can still do that. They have some delicious specialty flavors at Built.com. But if you want them a little bit quicker, now you can go to your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right, so head to your local Walmart today, go to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. Or if you're close to Sam's Club, go in and grab a 13-bar box of hit flavors like Brownie Batter Puff and Churro Puff. You can thank me later. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. You every day or so listen to this podcast Monday through Friday. Tune in tomorrow. We'll have reaction to this schedule release tonight. I will not be watching the full 3 hours on NFL Network, but I certainly will be keeping an eye on the schedule, and I'll give you my thoughts on the order of the Jets games and when they will be played. Today, though, we're talking about things to watch for as the NFL schedule will be released. I mean, if you want, tell me if you do watch all 3 hours tonight. Please tell me how it is. I can't imagine it's going to be very good on NFL Network. I can't imagine why we need 3 hours to unveil a schedule for the NFL. You'd think they could just tweet that out, but who cares? What do I know? So let's talk about some things to watch for in this schedule. I think one of the real dangers this time of year is you talk about who the easy games are and who the difficult games are, but the reality is we don't really know. Teams surprise us every single year, and we always look backwards. You'll see some stat come out tonight about the toughest strength of schedule. It's always based on the 2022 standings, when the 2023 standings are going to be very different. Teams that were bad last year are going to be good this year. Teams that were good last year are going to be bad this year. There are going to be injuries that are unexpected. There are going to be things that come out of nowhere. Last year, nobody thought the Giants would be a playoff team. This year, people are penciling them in as one of the tougher games on the Jets schedule. We don't really know, though. I do think that at the extremes, we at least have a good idea of a few teams that will be really good and a few teams that will be really bad. Now, there are no guarantees here because this time last year, I was telling you Seattle was going to be a team that was really bad. And they, of course, behind Geno Smith, they ended up going to the playoffs. So even those are no guarantees. But I think there are some games on the schedule where we can presume, barring some sort of injury, barring some sort of unexpected event, there are going to be some teams that are going to be excellent football teams. And the three that I think are on the Jet schedule, and they combine for 4 games, the Buffalo Bills, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, this year, the Jets get the NFC East. So they play the 4 teams in the NFC East. They play Washington, they play Philadelphia, they play Dallas, and they play the Giants. So they get Philadelphia, a team that was in the Super Bowl a year ago. They also have to play the AFC West. They play the 4 teams from the AFC West. So they play the Chargers, they play the Chiefs, they play the Raiders, and they play the Broncos. So you get both teams from the Super Bowl last year. You get a Buffalo team that's really tough. So to me, those are probably the 4 toughest games on the schedule. And there's never a guarantee that a team that was in the Super Bowl last year is going to be good this year. But if you look at the roster quality of those teams, Kansas City and Philadelphia, it's kind of tough to imagine them falling to the degree they would need to fall to not be excellent football teams. And we know Buffalo's been at the top of the AFC East for a long time. Now, last year, the Jets kind of disproved what I was about to say. The last year was kind of the exception that proves the rule. But generally speaking, I think it's always better to have your easier games up front. I think I always prefer to be able to build a little bit momentum in the early part of the season, because so many times you see a season just fall apart because you get a tough schedule in the early part of the year. The team, doesn't do well. Maybe you have a bad break here or there. And suddenly you're like 1-4, 1-5, and it's over. And the players start quitting. There's all sorts of bad vibes around your team. A bad start can destroy your season in the NFL. Whereas a good start can build confidence, it can build momentum. And suddenly, you're in November, December, you're right in the playoff mix where you weren't expecting to be. Now, again, last year the Jets kind of disproved that to an extent because they started off really well. They got a run of backup quarterbacks early, and then as the schedule got tough later, they did not do so well. So it doesn't always work out that way. Generally speaking, though, I like to have the easier games up front so that your team can at least build a little bit of momentum heading into the second half of the season. But more than that, I think I want to see the Jets avoid these games being bunched together. I think I'd like to see an even distribution of these games through the course of the season. If maybe one of the games of these 4 tough games, one of them maybe the first couple weeks, one of them October, one of them November, one of them December. Because you don't want to get Buffalo, Philadelphia, Kansas City back to back to back. That puts you in a really tough spot because if heaven forbid you lose the game before that stretch, you could be looking at a 4-game losing streak. And losing streaks, again, they can build momentum in the NFL. You could be having a decent season and then just hit a rough patch and it snowballs on you and the season gets away from you. There are never any guarantees in the NFL, but I think for me, one of the keys to this schedule release is not to have these games bunched too close together because NFL season is tough enough as it is. Even when you play the worst team in the NFL, they have a reasonable chance of beating you. It's very rare a team goes 0-17. It's never happened. I mean, we've only had the 17-game season for 2 years, but even when the season was 16 games, there have only been 2 teams that went 0-16. So even the worst teams in the NFL history, aside from the 17 Browns and the 08 Lions, they at least won 1 game during those seasons. You can always catch a tough game, but you don't want to have Kansas City, Philadelphia, Buffalo back to back to back because then a 3-game losing streak can just send your season into a free fall. So I'd like for these games an even distribution. Now, as far as the other games go, you'll hear analysis though. The Giants and Cowboys both made the playoffs last year. They're going to be really. We don't know. The truth is we don't know. Those are teams that could easily fall back. Cleveland, missed the playoffs last year. They could be better this year. Denver could be better with Sean Payton. It's possible he figures things out with Russell Wilson. The Chargers, I mean, they're tough with Justin Herbert, but they're a chronic underachiever, so you don't know which direction they're going to go in. Miami, things could go either way. So you'll hear a lot of analysis about the difficulty of the strength of schedule. But in reality, I mean, the teams that I look at that are tough are Buffalo, Philadelphia, and Kansas City. And outside of that, it's kind of a coin flip. So I'm not going to go crazy over the strength of schedule. I'm not going to say, outside of those games, these are the tough games. I think we can guess Houston's going to be a pretty easy game for the Jets. It's a game the Jets probably should win. But outside of that, it's very difficult to say. So I just hope that the tough games don't come together. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, I'll give you some final thoughts on this schedule release. There are a couple more things I'll be looking for as the Jets learn their schedule tonight. We'll talk about those things I'm watching ahead here on this Thursday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Thursday ahead of the NFL schedule released tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern on NFL Network. Of course, there probably will be leaks through the day, so we very well may know the Jets schedule before 8 o'clock Eastern. I think it's the most overhyped day of the NFL calendar, but I do think there are some things that you can take from it. I think one thing I'm looking for, we know when the Jets are playing the Dolphins at the Meadowlands. It's always important to know when the Jets are playing the Dolphins in Miami. You desperately want to avoid a September game in Miami. A January game is fun. A January game is kind of ideal, to be honest with you. Even though the Jets played their Week 18 game there last year and lost, that's a nice trip. If you're going from New York to Miami in January as a player, you're probably going to be pretty happy because it's going to be beautiful weather. You're getting out of the cold. You're getting out of the snow. It's not so bad. You want to avoid the trip to Miami in the early stages of the season because it's still summer down there. Summer lasts a long time, and it's very hot and it's very humid. And in the early part of the season, this is something, teams just do not put their players on the field in preseason games. So players, they're NFL athletes, so I'm not going to say they're in bad shape, but they're not in game shape at the start of the season. And you see this happen every year. There's some team that goes down to Miami week 1, week 2, and their players, they deal with cramps. They deal with hydration issues because it's so hot and humid on the field. I mean, it can get to 110 on the field at points in September because it's still summer down there. It becomes a difficult environment. The Dolphins are in an interesting division because the 3 other teams in the AFC East are all northern teams. So sometimes you'll see the Dolphins have issues late in the season when they have to make late season December road trips to New England or Buffalo or New York. But it's not totally unfair because teams have to go down to Miami in September. That's when Dolphins fans complain about their team needing to come north in the cold weather. They never tell you about the early part of the season where their team gets to host these games in a climate their players are used to, but the opponent is not used to. And it's the early part of the season. It's a part where players, again, are not really in game shape. You want to avoid being one of those teams. So I'm really hoping the Jets avoid a September game in Miami. That's something I say every year, and I mean it every year because I think it's a really tough spot to put a team. And the last thing I have my eye on is that the Jets do have 2 trips scheduled to the western part of the country. Now, not really the West Coast, but the western part of the country. They have a trip out to Las Vegas, and they have a trip out to Denver. So they'll be playing at the Raiders and at the Broncos. And even though the Jets won at Denver last year, I always hate going out to Denver. I think that's one of the toughest outdoor road venues in the NFL. It's got a reputation up there with Seattle and Kansas City as being among the loudest outdoor stadiums for visiting teams. I hate going out there. I'd like to see this trip not be a back-to-back. Now, a couple of years ago, it was interesting. In 2020, the Jets had back-to-back trips in December to Seattle and Los Angeles to play the Rams. And there was talk the Jets actually asked for that, which I don't really understand. I think you want to avoid the long trips back-to-back, so I'd like to see those spaced out a little bit, just to like to see the really tough games spaced out. I don't like the idea of the Jets traveling out to the Western. Now, they don't have to go all the way out to the West Coast. Neither of these teams is on the West Coast. The Raiders used to be out in Oakland. Now they're out in Las Vegas, but 2 long flights. I'd like to see the Jets avoid having those back-to-back. I guess really what I'm looking for is a little bit of balance in the schedule, because I think when you multiply a difficult aspect of the schedule, I think it can bring a tough spot for a team. So we'll keep our eye on what happens tonight. I'm certainly not going to watch 3 hours, but there will be some things to talk about from the schedule release, and I'll talk about them tomorrow. But for now, that's all for today. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, a big thumbs up for this episode. These things help Locked On Jets out, help other Jets fans find us. Have a great Thursday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about the Jets schedule.